You may remember my recent video on the lunar eclipse in late March and how it interacted with Trump's chart. And you see it here with the moon back then in Libra, the sun on the other side, which was triggering his axis Hollywood T-square, Eris, Neptune, Mercury. Now we are going to the next eclipse, which is happening April 8th. And where the previous eclipse, the lunars happen with sun opposite moon, full moons, so that the Earth can cause the moon to disappear, so to speak. Now, the moon has traveled this way for a couple of weeks, and the sun has moved forward so that at 19 degrees they meet. Solar eclipses necessarily are on new moons so that the moon can get in the way and block the sun from Earth's perspective. And you see here in the ephemeris, April 8th, this is an ephemeris cast for Eastern time, 2:20 p.m. That's the exact time, close to 19.5 degrees of Aries. Now, the first thing to say is it continues the theme as before, because the previous eclipse was still connected to the 3-9 axis, which thereby involves the legal domain, the ninth, and all the consequent correlations, which in his case, as you can see, for the most part are quite negative, particularly when you consider that a trial is due to start in the middle of the month. And these eclipses, though it's happening on the 8th, affect the surrounding area. And so the middle of the month fits well within the meaning and the nature of this eclipse as a very negative thing that he wishes wouldn't happen. Trump absolutely hates the idea of being in a courtroom and actually dealing with facts, because he knows that the facts completely contradict the constant stream of lies that he spews. And so we look at this solar eclipse to try to assess how it might affect the situation, and we see that first, if we say, well, what's happening at 19 degrees? And you look around and not too many planets. The closest would be Jupiter, because Jupiter is on the other end of it here at 17.5. Well, in fact, on that alone, you turn this a little bit here to show the axis so that it is catching as Jupiter. But more importantly, you notice that over here, the cluster of planets in Cancer in the 12th coalesce by degree at 19.5, precisely square that eclipse. So therefore, this eclipse is highly, highly focused in the legal realm. And as I already said, this could simply be the consequence of a trial beginning in the middle of the month, during which things can be revealed that he'd rather were not revealed, plus whatever else may come out of it, because I'm starting to wonder if perhaps the Alvin Bragg case, which many have said is the weakest case, may turn out to be the most important case. We'll see. Time will tell. According to the assessment, because it only involves documents, it's definitely less serious than the Jack Smith DC case or the Georgia case with Fonnie Willis. Nevertheless, they are criminal charges, and this is a historic event to have a president dealing with this at any point in his life, really, but especially during a political campaign. So then we look around and we see further patterns revealing the tremendous stress around this time, because yes, the eclipse through the sun and moon is enough to do that, but then you notice that these 8th house planets are no help at all. Pisces is at odds with Gemini, and the closer they are to his sun and Uranus, the more problematic they are, so they're no real help. The Pluto cycle in early Aquarius is moving toward a station, which you see here in early May, in the 2nd degree. That's a precise square and a half or close to precise, within a degree, to his Uranus, which is the classic sensation of something stopping your reckless independence, which is one of the ways you would describe Trump's usage of his Uranus, the way he is oppositional and constantly goes his own way and rejects everything and just does whatever he wants. With Pluto there's a definite stop sign, and basically the whole time, because you see it stationed here, but it's essentially at that degree and minute for all intents and purposes, all of April, all of May. It's a constant thing. The other thing he has is, if you look at Mercury just went retrograde, and as the eclipse happens, it's at 24, almost 25 Aries. That's directly square the Venus, just like Eris is doing that very same thing. So Mercury is acting as a trigger in one sense, but it's present there and it's very stressful in those degrees. And in terms of what it'll do in retrograde, it'll backtrack to 15, 16 degrees and then go forward. So the whole time it's in the legal house, going back and forth over critical degrees. You can see that at 15, 16, it's connecting to the Mercury-Saturn midpoint and to the Mercury-Venus midpoint. At other points opposing Jupiter, it's definitely wired in. Major problem. Then we see that Venus, at the time of the eclipse, is in early Aries. So what it's done is it's taken the place of where the Sun was for the previous eclipse, triggering the Access Hollywood T-square, which it does most intensely for a few days. So April 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, pretty much that whole week features the Venus there. Again, signaling another major stress point. And then we see that when we look at the Jupiter-Uranus upcoming conjunction, which is going to happen in here, it's April 20th, I believe, in this range. Jupiter reaches 21 degrees. It's right in here, April 20th. And this is the conjunction that some have thought would represent some kind of assistance to him from people in high places. And I suppose, in a sense, that's already happening. I mean, witness the travesty with Aileen Cannon, all the twists and turns where she tries to help him any way she can, issuing disingenuous messages, goofy legal rulings, anything to delay, obstruct, and even potentially damage the case, although we see that Jack Smith is fighting back pretty hard. The point is that if you grant him that and say, well, there's the fact that the Supreme Court has delayed his DC case, which I think is totally shameful, but let's say you give him that, around the fact that Jupiter and Uranus are conjunct where they are. To be honest, I'm quite skeptical of that interpretation, but let's say you give him that. Problem is that from there, very precisely, there's a 150 to this moon. And this has been the question mark around his health, because that's further emphasized by where Pluto and Neptune are transiting in proximity of 150s to the ascendant and to Mars. It's a very dangerous situation. So this month is quite a tricky month for this guy, based on where the eclipse is and where the other planets are, and doesn't get better from April 8th. If anything, the risks increase as the month is unfolding, because you see, for instance, something like Mercury hanging around way too long, the Venus itself at first linking to the Access Hollywood T, then switching to channeling energy toward these planets later in the month. And now I'm showing all the different periods for the planets involved. And if you think this only applies to April and May, that would be incorrect. Because on the one hand, first of all, when eclipses radiate energy in a certain direction, they're actually doing it pre-eclipse and post-eclipse. So in a sense, what is happening now, we've seen coming for quite some time. And so now it just peaks as the eclipse is happening. But the eclipse has this effect of carrying over the energy for months going forward. So on that account, there's much more to come. In particular, when you look at the situation in this chart, as you move toward June, July, mid-June to mid-July especially, with Saturn stationing in the 8th sign in proximity of a square to his moon and sun, the situation can only get worse. There's no way it gets better. It gets worse. And now finally, as I bring the role of Mars into the foreground of this landscape, even though in many cases Mars acts primarily as a trigger planet, but in this case is itself transiting in Pisces degrees from mid-April to mid-May that signify clear and direct pressure on his moon in Sagittarius, as well as his Uranus and Sun in Gemini, which really amps up the tension and seems perfectly reflective of the Stormy Daniels trial starting in the middle of this month. This is a perfect pattern for massive irritation tilting upward toward anger and rage, and the distinct possibility of quite literally blowing a gasket, which, when I see that on the precise day of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, April 19th, wouldn't you know it, Mars is in degrees of Pisces, precisely square his moon, and from the dangerous 8th sign. And what does this moon rule? The Cancer 12th house, which is a primary health house ruling hospitals. In reality, though, both the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction and the Mars square are operative prior to and after that date, so that in reality, from Thursday, April 18th to at least Tuesday, April 23rd, by which point Mars gets beyond the square to his Sun, The ex-president is cruising through extremely threatening territory. So, in summary, tough times for the Orange Menace. Sad. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy.